Hello and welcome to another happy hour episode of The Novel Brain with Dr. E. Today is Juneteenth, 2020, and I'm going to be talking about a very difficult dialogue. For many of you, you've heard of it, it's white privilege, but have you heard of white privilege as being the other side of racism? Let's talk about that in a moment, so stay tuned. Author Paula Rothenberg wrote in her book White Privilege, quote, "White privilege is the other side of racism. It is often easier to deplore racism and its effect than to take responsibility for the privileges some of us receive as a result of it." Unquote. The reason why this is such a difficult dialogue is that there's a lot to digest, and it really is historical to look at where we are Juneteenth, 155 years after the first Juneteenth. And to me, it's emotional. So this particular podcast, I'm going to limit to about 20 minutes, but I know that I could go on for hours on this because it's very, very much a part of me now. And I think it's a part of a lot of people right now to really explore where you are on your own sort of spectrum of either white privilege or Black Lives Matter movement, or where you are with just the disproportionate mass incarceration of POCs, the nation's stark racial wealth gap. Where are you? Where are you with the overwhelming police brutality? I mean, if you're looking at just the news, you can't ignore it. People of color are being affected on a daily basis, either by murders, lynchings, police brutality. It's an everyday account. And it's clear that systemic racism is alive and well in America today. And I'm going to briefly touch upon systemic racism, which was defined was a sociologist, Joe Fegan. So Fegan defined systemic racism as including the complex array of anti-Black practice, the unjustly gained political economic powers of whites, and the continuing economic and other resource inequalities along racial lines, also including the white racist ideology and attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. So here we are again, rationalizing white privilege and power, and it turns out that white privilege may endure not because white Americans have this magical sort of uniformly held racial belief about others, but it's more likely that it's based on their own belief about themselves. So isn't that interesting? Here you are listening to The Novel Brain. The reason I'm talking about this is there's a psychological component that people are faced with when faced with some kind of evidence that their group may benefit from some kind of privilege in America or across the world now. The study of these authors are that they not only fail to take responsibility for such benefits, but they also find those claims are threatening. And even furthermore, they're going to claim some kind of hardship to manage this threat, like some kind of like sort of white guilt in some ways. Essentially, white people may accept that group-level inequities exist, okay? But denying that they personally benefit from that privilege in order to protect their own sort of self-conception is the game plan here. And I don't think that people set out inherently to do this. I just think that this is the way of the world. You know, history didn't just like start overnight, and it took many centuries for this to occur in America. And now here we are. There's a study that was done. L. Taylor Phillips and Brian S. Lowry, they actually came up with this really interesting study. And I'm not going to talk about that so much as I'm talking about the quotes that they came up with. These are more profound. They quoted, "People may accept that in-group privilege exists, but change their perceptions of their own lives in order to deny the role of systemic advantages in their success," unquote. So that does speak volumes. And if you want to like rewind that and listen to that piece again, or just like cite them. It's L. Taylor Phillips and Brian S. Lowry. It's just interesting, I think, at the very least. And I think it's just fascinating to sort of understand that you may be getting some privilege, but you're not going to acknowledge that, in fear that you're either going to lose that or you're going to be looked at as bad for actually accepting that. So that's the sort of white fragility piece. So, in a way to counter things, and that's sort of my duty, is not only to bring a little bit of the why and the perception of as to why this is occurring, but I want to kind of talk more about how this is the other side of race. And that's why I'm going to ask these questions. So sometimes you have to ask difficult questions and figure out where you are on the spectrum, whether you're a white ally or whether you are completely in the dark with a lot of these things. I think there's nowhere better to start than now to inform yourself and better adapt to the way the world is. That's really my job, is to help you do that. So the first question I have is, all right, when you get pulled over, have you ever asked yourself, did I get pulled over because of an actual issue? Or did I get pulled over for racial profiling? All right, so I'm a person of color, and I know that for many black people and people of color, an encounter with a white cop while driving is oftentimes simply a question of being seen as an outsider. I know a lot of parents that have to worry about their own children getting into the car and driving because of all the different accounts of police brutality or even murder now. So there's another thing called just walking while black. All right, so walking the streets or running for daily exercise and being murdered. These are the things that you have to ask yourself. Did I get stopped because of this? Did I get accosted, harassed, assaulted because of my skin color? It's just profound. Another one is that, say you were convicted of a crime and you have to be in front of a jury. Do you have any peers on that jury that would support you, not just because of your color, but because they understand your culture and they understand who you are? Unfortunately, racially lopsided juries aren't simply an aberration. Even in the case of Ferguson in the United States, this is an everyday occurrence to find a legal system that can actually be fair and people can have a jury that's fair. And moving on, and this is kind of an emotional thing. So I did this earlier this morning with a group and just got so many heated answers, and just it was a profile of a group of what I look at as America today, every different color and creed and age and gender. And I just found it to be really profound. And we're in the woods discussing this, and it was such an emotional moment where people were actually coming to terms with where they were. And that's the most important thing that we can take from this, I think. So the next question is, will a casual hangout with my friends in the public lead the police to say that we're loitering, possibly ask us and force us to move? So black and brown people, this is something that happens kind of regularly, and it's not even a surprise. Perhaps it happens almost daily that you're being moved and shifted around because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, let me ask this question. What is the wrong place and what is the wrong time? In a land that is free, if you are brown or black POC and you're in the wrong place in the wrong time, isn't that almost everywhere now? You can't jog in broad daylight without that being the wrong place and the wrong time. You can't be in church praying without that being the wrong place and the wrong time and getting killed in Charleston, South Carolina. So without the benefit of the doubt, POCs, young and old, are targeted for police harassment. They're thought of as conspiring gang members or thugs even, otherwise as unsavory people who need to take their gathering elsewhere. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that has occurred to me even, It's a POC, and I hadn't even thought of it because it happens so inherently all the time that you just don't notice anymore. So ask yourself if that's ever happened to you in your gathering of friends. Will I get stopped and frisked if I wear a hoodie and jeans? If I'm wearing a black hoodie and I'm just in the wrong place in the wrong time? I guess that's another question to ask yourself, sort of a sub-question. And how will people judge me if I wear or want to wear my cultural clothing, a turban perhaps? How will people judge me if I want to eat the food of my culture in public? I mean, these are smaller things maybe to think about, but guess what? People do have different garb and they have different food that they might eat. And in America, which is supposed to be the land of the free, what we're seeing is a lot of people putting that down as un-American. And that's just unfortunate, because to me, food is everything. It's like introducing yourself to another person's culture, being curious about why those are the ingredients that are used, why are those the spices that are being used, and why is this so damn delicious? Well, I mean, I can say in comparison, American food is really boring and bland, and I think the best thing that we've ever done, and don't get me wrong, folks, I'm American and I will eat American food, but it is just, I mean, the best we've done is fusion. We've fused other cultures' food to make it American, or borrowed it even. But just do yourself a favor and try other people's foods and understand their culture through their food and their garb too. What are you wearing and why? It's just interesting, isn't it? Rather than demeaning people and demoralizing people for these things of being different. Because what it is, American is not just this white race. And if you believe that, I think the nationalist part of you has got to really go back to school and figure this out. Maybe you were given the wrong history, and maybe this is like the novel Brain 101 history, and maybe you're mad at me now. Again, I'm not offended, but don't be mad at me, and be mad at the system for not telling you and not informing you that there's a world out there, and America is not the way you see it. Perhaps that's what this lesson is all about. An emotional, fun lesson. Let's put it that way. All right, so will my funny-looking name get my resume tossed in the garbage bin? This was a question that was posed by a group member earlier, and I thought I'd include it because, hey, there are white-sounding names like maybe Emily or Brendan, and then there's like black-sounding names. Maybe your name's Lakeisha or Jamal, and you put your name on there on your resume, and you didn't get a call, and maybe you wondered why. Was there a level of discrimination? Weren't they supposed to be equal opportunity employers? Did I get discriminated against here? We don't know, right? But I mean, the truth is that I think there are a lot of people out there who have had to anglicize their name, which is a shame, and I would never do that. And I hope that nobody would ever have to do that, but they've had to do that for a living and to get a job. And that's just really plain sad to me. And have you had to do that, folks? Have you had to do that to your name? I mean, if you're a Smith or a Johnson or a Jones, this is not calling you out, but this is asking you, have you ever even had to think about changing your name in order to put food on your table because you needed a job? I mean, my answer is I think not. That's not something you had to even think about. So these are the stressors, and this is why white privilege is the other side of racism. It's because having that privilege means that you have to change the way that you handle situations, not making the people of color, the black and the brown and the yellow people around you, change their ways because they've worked and struggled hard in their own rights and haven't had the same privileges afforded for them. All right, so stores. Here's another question that was posed. Will store reps insist that I can't afford this expensive item, or are they going to follow me around because they're good customer service, or is it racial profiling? All right, so store clerks, surveillance cameras are everywhere, and I think that a lot of people are afraid of black and brown people in their stores many times because they think they're going to steal. And that's just what not only the media is portraying, but it's an embedded stereotype that these are the people who do the crime. And the truth is that if you look at it, prisons were designed, and they're privately owned in America, to have more prisoners. That's how they make more business. And black and brown people of less economic wealth have been many times involved in crime or stealing because they have nothing. And is that wrong? Yeah, sure, it's wrong, but at the same time, it's an economic issue here. If you actually start with nothing, what are you going to do to get something? You might actually do crime. But are they the only criminals in this world? No. Oh my God, no. What about white crime, folks? Let's put some of those people behind bars. The only problem is there's not enough of them being caught, and they don't keep the prisons open. All right, that's a little bit of a rampage on the side of the prisons, but I think maybe you can kind of hear how I feel about that here on the Novel Brain. All right, another question. Will I get disciplined at work or school if I don't conform to Eurocentric beauty standards? All right, so another question that maybe some white people haven't had to ask. I mean, some places have workplace and school dress codes that don't allow men or women to wear braids or dreadlocks. And then they even maybe sanction certain textures of hair, and maybe that's not natural and it doesn't feel right, but people have had to adapt to Eurocentric beauty standards, not only because of beauty standards and that people want to actually feel good about themselves. It's just an inherent sort of populist way of saying this is what's acceptable and this is what's not. And that is the problem, folks. It's not me. It's not you. It's the system. That's the problem. That's why it's systemic racial problem has got to go. All right, so another question that was asked: when I ask a stranger for help, will they see my skin color and avoid engaging with me? Yeah. Unfortunately, folks, black people and people of color, there's this constant worry that your skin color is going to make people around you less likely to help you. When I move into a new area, will the neighbors start moving away because of my race? All right, so white flight is what this is called. This happens when white residents migrate to other areas of a city or region in order to avoid racial integration with blacks and people of color. I think I even saw in the news the other day this really horrible person, this white man in his 60s. He happened to work for the immigration office, yelling at a young black girl that she needs to get out of the neighborhood. And it's just disgusting. I couldn't even watch the video. I hope he's lost his job. I think that was this morning or yesterday. And I hope he's lost his job by now. And maybe he's had to move from that neighborhood. That'd be excellent. A little justice right there. Let's do another one here. Is this potential mate really interested in me, or do they have an odd fetish or obsession related to my racial background? Yeah, so very interesting. Maybe you haven't thought about this, and maybe you just now are hearing this for the first time, but numerous people of color have long decried being fetished for their backgrounds. Many minorities maybe even ask themselves if their cultural heritage is being appreciated or mocked in a dating encounter. Maybe they're being racialized to the point where it's not really about them, and maybe the person wants to just date somebody from your race. I know that this occurs a lot for Asian women. Some men like this overly submissive demeanor. I don't know. Other cultures might see black men having strong sexual stamina. Hey, what is it, But I mean, isn't it the idea of meeting somebody about a person versus the race? And you might have a preference. I think that's preferable than to have somebody obsess about you because of your racial background. I do have one story. We don't have enough time, but I do remember somebody in my college days that did obsess about my racial background, and I had to dump her. Folks, that was not cool. Yeah. I mean, it was over the top, too. That's the reason she really had to go. So the final one I think is really important is that all other things being equal, would my life be easier if I were a member of the dominant racial group? And have you asked yourself that, black and brown people, probably every day, and with several different encounters throughout your day, you've wondered, would that gone differently if I was white? And white folks, have you had to ask yourself that throughout your day, whether your life would be harder if it were a situation where you were black or brown? I don't know if you have had to ask yourself that question, and maybe that is where you are in the spectrum of things right now. Maybe you've been working on this for years, and this is where you put yourself, and I appreciate that, and I applaud that, because I think that's important. Putting yourself in the shoes of a black and a brown POC is essential right now. To say, would life be different if I were one of them? And with that, I'm going to end today's episode. It's been a pleasure to present you some of these questions and talk about how race can be not only a problem, but one of the things that we really need to do is try to identify why white privilege is the other side of racism. All right, so take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. Come back soon. We'll do this again every Friday. Again, this is Dr. E with the Novel Brain. Be well all.